Welcome to Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on this podcast. His name is David Graham. He is with the Libertarian Party of Kansas, and he's going to tell us about what office he's running for, as well as everything in regard to that office, and also the exciting things he's doing otherwise. So welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you, Andrew.
David, could you please tell our audience which race you're running for first and foremost?
Yes, well, I'm actually running for two offices. It's the same office in two adjoining counties in Kansas, and the position is county attorney.
Okay.
In some places that's called the prosecuting attorney or the district attorney. In Kansas, we have county attorneys. It's the same thing though. So it's to be the prosecutor, the state prosecutor for the county. I am going to be on the ballot as the Libertarian candidate in Morris County, Kansas, which is Council Grove area. And then I'm also going to be running as a write-in candidate for county attorney in Marion County, which is the biggest city there is Hillsborough. Some of your listeners may have heard of Hillsborough because that's where Tabor College is. And of course, a lot of people have heard of Marion, Kansas, because that's where a corrupt police officer raided a newspaper.
Oh, okay. So if you're running for two offices, what's going to happen if you win them both?
Well, that would be a great problem to have. I don't think I'm going to have that problem. However, I have decided I will, well, first of all, there would be no prohibition against me doing both jobs. The only prohibition there would be basically time. Would I have enough time to do both? But I would, what I intend to do is to, serve in the county that gives me the most votes.
Oh, okay. So if you had to decide between the two, whichever would give you the slight edge.
Right. That's my current thinking is that's what I would do.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea.
There's another wrinkle in this thing that I might just explain since you're asking about that, and that is I do have a Republican opponent in Morris County. There is no Democrat or other candidate running. In Marion County, there's not going to be anyone. There's not going to be anyone's name on the ballot. So it's strictly write-ins, and as far as I know, I'm the only write-in candidate. So that's, an additional little bit of a wrinkle in terms of if I were to get elected in both, which would I serve?
Oh, wow. So you're running unopposed?
For now, yes.
Okay.
In Marion County, yes.
Okay, wow. An election is not too far away. It's the middle of September as we talk. So wow, that'd be awesome if nobody else gets there. They're not going to listen to this podcast, so they're not going to get any ideas from us. So that'd be awesome.
I'm excited about it, especially in an area that's received so much publicity for all the wrong reasons.
All right, awesome. So if you could please tell us a little bit about your background, a brief biographical sketch, and also what led you to the Libertarian Party in general.
Sure. So I grew up in northeast Kansas, in the Kansas City area on the Kansas side of the line, and ultimately went to the University of Kansas Law School.
Okay.
And after working briefly as a prosecutor after graduation, I opened my own practice, and I've had that ever since. Over the years, I have had a job here or there as a prosecutor or other type of jobs with different organizations. but for the most part have been in private practice. I grew up in a mixed household. My folks, at least when I was very young, adhered to different political parties. But they shared values though. They shared conservative, traditionally American values, and that's what I grew up with. I was involved in scouting. I'm an Eagle Scout, and I learned those core values. And so by the time I was in high school, and certainly by the time I was in college, this was during the Reagan era. I identified as a Republican, and the Libertarian Party at that time nationally was a very young party. It had just been created, within a few years thereof, and I was hearing snippets about it, and the more I looked, the more I liked, and of course, that led me to ultimately embrace it, especially as the Republican Party left its base of traditional values and the idea of less government and lower taxes. When the Republican Party nationally left that idea, then I became a libertarian. And I since then have been active both as a party member but also as a candidate. 2 years ago, I ran for United States Senate on the Libertarian ticket. I was on every ballot in the state of Kansas, and I got 3% of the vote.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, good job.
Thank you. So now, Kansas is having a strange year this year, and this happens once every 12 years where we have no statewide offices available. The only, if you want to call it a statewide race, it'd be the presidential race, but that's the only race that's going to be held throughout the state. Now, of course, U.S. House of Representatives seats are up, because those are up every 2 years, but we don't have a U.S. Senate race, and we don't have any of our state offices. So, because I strongly believe that the Libertarian Party needs candidates, I wanted to run for something, even if it was just as a paper candidate. But in my case, I actually do want to serve as prosecutor because I think libertarians can make a difference in that type of job. So at the time, no one was running in Morris County, so I filed there. And then, as I've explained, I've since subsequently chosen to run as a write-in also in Marion County.
Sure. So when you did private practice, what types of cases did you handle?
Well, right now in my private practice, I handle all kinds of cases. Now, I am a full-service attorney. I will tell you that about 50% of my practice is criminal defense, and I think I enjoy that the most. It's challenging, and it gives me a real opportunity to help people.
Sure.
The other, I'd say 50% of my practice, or almost 50% of my practice, is what I call consumer defense. So this is helping people who get sued on credit cards or a mortgage foreclosure, or something along those lines. I also do a smattering of landlord-tenant, and of course wills and trusts, probate, and then occasionally, and right now I actually have two cases, what I would call cause cases, where there's a real libertarian principle at stake. So right now I've got two of those cases. I'm helping a group in Topeka, Kansas, fight the city of Topeka, which has ignored the law and refuses to let their citizens and their residents vote on a property tax initiative. And in fact, the city is supposed to, today's their deadline to respond to our lawsuit. I haven't seen it yet. So we'll see what they come back with. But the law is very clear, I think. And then the other case I have involves a case in South Central Kansas, where the city is trying to criminalize and penalize my client for having a pot-bellied pig.
Oh, no.
Yes, they don't allow, well, they say they don't allow pigs in their city. I've read their code. They actually do under certain circumstances. She qualifies for an exception. They won't recognize her fitting in that exception. So I'm fighting the city on that. So I think there's an important libertarian principle here in that you should be allowed to have any animal you want on your own property. Now, if the animal gets loose or if the animal harms humans, then I think the government has an interest in curtailing that. But otherwise, you should be allowed to have whatever animal you want on your own property. This pig, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are nodding their heads, a pot-bellied pig is not the same as pigs that are raised at a farm for slaughter. This pig is not an agricultural item. This pig, you couldn't sell this pig at a pig auction. And if you tried to fatten it up, these types of pigs only get to about 100, I think I read 194 pounds tops. So, but it's important to this family because the pig is an emotional support animal for a small child in the family, and we can prove through empirical evidence as well as expert testimony that this child who suffers from depression and anxiety, both of those conditions has improved greatly since having Ginger, their pig, in their home. And yet the city is determined to make her get rid of the pig. It's just a horrible situation. So I'm happy to help that person. And from time to time, I have other cause cases where there's a libertarian principle at stake. And of course, I enjoy fighting that. I had a landlord-tenant case, for example, where there was a licensing issue involved.
Okay.
And they were penalizing my client, the tenant, for the landlord's failure to obtain a license. So the very law, and this is such typical behavior from government, a law that was created supposedly to protect people was being used to penalize the very people it was supposed to be helping. Now, in terms of being a county attorney or being a prosecutor, I'm very excited about that because I have done that before. And what I want to do is I want to reform and expand our diversion program. In Kansas, we have pretrial diversion.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
I've heard that term before, so can you please explain to our audience specifically what you have in mind? Does that may vary by state?
Sure. Well, I think most states have it, although some states do a post-adjudication diversion. In Kansas, we do a pre-adjudication diversion. And basically what that says, it's like probation. The person comes in and they sign a contract, and it's like probation. There's a list of do's and don'ts, and then a term. Normally it'll be like a 1-year contract. And if they do all the things they're supposed to do, like get their GED, stay employed, go to school, whatever, is appropriate, and then they don't do any of the things they're not supposed to do, like they're not supposed to violate the law, they're not supposed to be in certain types of establishments, they're not supposed to associate with known felons, etc. If they adhere to their contract for the term of 1 year, then the charges are dropped.
Wow.
And they're dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can't be brought up again. And so this gives a first-time offender or a minor offender, I would say, an opportunity to get the charges against them dropped without them having to pay a fine or go to jail, and to avoid having a criminal record. And if you ever watch an old Western, they always tell some kid who gets in trouble, go west, young man. Well, you could go west and start over, and you didn't even have to change your name. You could, crop up and get with the program and live a good life. You can't do that anymore. In the computer era we live in now, if you have so much as a traffic ticket, you can move halfway around the world, change your name, and they're going to find out you had a traffic ticket 20 years ago. And so a criminal record, even a criminal record for a misdemeanor or a traffic offense, can severely limit you nowadays. It can limit what types of jobs you get. It can limit where you live, both whether that's government housing or private housing. A lot of housing developments have prohibitions against people with criminal records, even if those are misdemeanor and nonviolent. So I plan on expanding the diversion program. The other thing I plan on doing is being very generous with bail provisions. Right now in our country, as you probably know, the idea of cash bail is kind of a hot topic. And should we continue with cash bail or not? I personally don't have a problem with cash bail, but I think it should be reasonable. And of course, the Eighth Amendment prohibits excessive bail.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the courts ignore that. And so, for example, a lot of people in a lot of different circumstances, both in the state and federal courts, can find themselves sitting in jail without any bail, with no bail. Now, if that's not excessive, I don't know what is. I mean, even if on a murder charge, if your bail's $1 million or your bail's $5 million, at least that's a bail. But denying bail altogether is wrong. So my attitude is I'm not going to, of course it's always up to the judge, but I'm not going to ask for an excessive bail. If you have ties to the community and you're going to come back to court and face the charges and get them resolved in the correct way, or in a legal way through our legal system, then I'm not going to seek a high bail just to be punitive and just to hold people in jail. I think, Andrew, it's kind of instructive. In Kansas, when COVID hit, there was a big move to empty the jails. Not to protect the prisoners from each other, but the staff was worried that they were going to get COVID from the prisoners. So there was a big push to if there wasn't a substantial reason for you to be in jail, they wanted to release you. In Wichita, Kansas, Wichita is the largest city in Kansas, and in their city jail, they went through and they looked at all the people who were there just because they couldn't make a bond of like $100. They looked at all the people that were there on no bail because they were awaiting a hearing on a probation revocation. They looked at people who had minor offenses. None of these people were felons. These were just misdemeanors, okay? They released 400 people.
Wow.
That's 400 people in one city in Kansas that were released from jail because there was no good reason for them to be in jail. That's amazing. I don't want that sort of thing that to ever happen again, where people are sitting in jail for no good reason. So that's another thing I want to do. And then there's a couple other issues that are near and dear to me as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney that I want to address. Okay. One is the so-called war on drugs.
Yep, I was thinking about that.
I'm not a user of illegal drugs. It's not something that appeals to me in any way, shape, or form. However, I do believe in freedom, and I do believe that if people want to take a drug, they should be allowed to do so. So I think if the police are going to arrest people for mere possession of drugs, and if that is going to be against the law, then that's fine. I hope we can get some libertarians in our state legislature to change that. But those cases would be perfect for a diversion. Those cases would be perfect for a non-criminal outcome. Now, if you're selling drugs, especially to children, or if you're pushing drugs, and there is a difference there, then that's a different ball game, and that can be addressed. You know, all of these things tie into another issue too, and that's prison overcrowding.
Oh,
So in Kansas, we have the same problem that I know is present in virtually every other place in America, and that is the prisons are overcrowded. So why don't we decriminalize things like mere possession of drugs? I'm not talking about sale of drugs or pushing drugs. I'm talking about mere possession of drugs, especially soft drugs, so-called soft drugs like marijuana. And let's open those beds up for people that should be in prison, like sex traffickers.
Oh, yeah. Sounds good. Sounds reasonable.
Yes. And then I'd say the final thing I want to do as a prosecutor is try my best to be compassionate for families that are in crisis. You know, we have an agency in Kansas, just like in all the other states, that goes through and if there's an allegation of abuse or neglect, will sometimes take children from their parents and put them into foster care. The goal is reintegration, but sometimes that isn't actively or correctly pursued. I, as a prosecutor, pledge never to take children from a natural parent unless there is overwhelming, compelling evidence that there is a physical and immediate risk to the child. Otherwise, I believe children should stay in their home.
Oh, sure. That sounds reasonable and sensible.
So that's my agenda as that will be my agenda as a prosecutor.
Sounds good. So I trust that you also believe in jury nullification?
I do.
That's good.
I also believe in 12-person juries. Now in Kansas, on misdemeanors, you only get 6 people. In Florida, you only get 6 people on a felony. And the one exception is if they're trying to kill you through the death penalty, then you get a real jury of 12 people. But otherwise, you only get 6 people even for a felony. I think that's outrageous. Unfortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that that's just fine.
Okay. So you think the advantages of 12-person is it gives the defendant more opportunity more leeway, that they can be more certain that they're guilty if they are guilty?
Correct. And as a prosecutor, I don't have a problem with that, because if I can't convince 12 people that someone's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, then they shouldn't be found guilty.
Oh, sure. Does Kansas have the death penalty?
Kansas does have the death penalty, and my understanding is there's about, I should know this and I don't, I think there's about a dozen people currently on death row. I know that the first guy who got it when it was passed a dozen years ago or so, I talked with a person who is active with a group opposed to the death penalty, and he said that so-called number one in line is still about at least 5 years away from exhausting all their remedies. So whether Kansas will ever execute someone or not, again, I don't know. But Kansas does have the death penalty for certain types of murder.
Okay. So it sounds like you have it, but it's not used very often.
That's correct. That's correct. And fortunately, I mean, I hate to talk about murders by degree, but fortunately, we don't have a lot of multiple killings. We don't have a lot of killings for hire, that sort of thing. We have, of course, an unacceptably high number of murders, many of which are even first-degree murders. But fortunately, we don't have a lot of capital murders.
Okay, so murder for hire, so that's worse than if you get into a fight with somebody and you shoot them, because that would be maybe manslaughter, right?
Yes, if it's heat of passion, then it's a manslaughter. If it's during a fight that isn't heat of passion, then it's a second-degree murder.
Okay.
And those are not eligible for the death penalty. For the death penalty, yeah, it has to be at least a first-degree murder, meaning a felony murder or premeditation, where you planned it out, plotted it out. And even then, there has to be some aggravating factors, such as you did it for hire, or you killed several people, or you, I think another one is, if you torture the person before you kill them, or you kill them in a particularly heinous fashion. So it's I think it's good that it's restricted to the worst kinds of murder.
Sure, yeah, you must have it. So that brings me the question of, I asked this to a libertarian. We had a conference. I invited to a conference. This was 20 years ago, because it's not something that the Libertarian Party necessarily has a stand on. I don't hear libertarians address a lot. Would you say that libertarians tend to oppose the death penalty, or do you think that it depends?
Well, it's a great question. I can tell you that our national party, the Libertarian National Party, in its platform, it does oppose the death penalty. Okay. We also have a similar plank in the Kansas Libertarian Party platform. Okay. However, I can tell you that individual libertarians are probably closer to 50-50 in terms of whether or not they oppose the death penalty. I happen to think the death penalty is legitimate in certain situations. I think the state does have a right to impose the ultimate penalty for the ultimate crime in certain situations. But I like the fact that in Kansas, those situations are very few and far between. And it has to be, and plus, it has to be a unanimous 12-person verdict. There's an automatic appeal. I mean, there are a lot of safeguards in place for that. So I don't think there's anything in libertarian principles that prohibits the death penalty, but I do know that most libertarians oppose it just because we know how the state abuses power, and we don't want the state abusing that power by putting someone to death who, could be innocent.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Interesting. So, David, how can our audience support you in your campaign?
They can send a contribution to me at my I have a mailing address for this. Let me just give that out real quick. It's David Graham, Graham. I tell everybody I'm a white guy, and so it's just remember graham cracker. David Graham, and it's spelled like graham cracker, and it's P.O. Box 3664, and that's in Kansas City, Kansas 66103. So it's David Graham, P.O. Box 3664, Kansas City, Kansas 66103, and just mark that it's for the if you send a check or money order, just mark that it's on for the campaign, or put a note in the envelope or however you want to do it. And if it's okay, I'd like to also give my cell number in case somebody wants to call me and talk to me about the campaign.
Definitely. Go for it, please.
913-325-6596. 913-325-6596. Feel free to call anytime.
That's very generous of you to offer your phone number.
I'm happy to do it, Andrew, because podcasts like this are meaningful to me because the listeners generally are a step ahead of their fellow man. They're people who are concerned about our nation, and they want to be informed and active. So I'm always happy to hear from people like that.
Awesome. David, we thank you for coming on the campaign today. On the podcast today and talking about your exciting campaign.
Thank you, Andrew.
I wish you all the best in your campaign and your personal and professional life.
Thank you.
Take care. All the best.